In the lace-shadowed city of Bruges, a single-star sapphire brooch hides a microscopic map to a lost wartime fortune. Anonymous letters drip poison. Return what is not yours, or the Bruges will claim you. A timid jeweller trembles. A quiet assistant is found drowned beneath the Pierdenbrook, bruised, drugged, murdered. Miss Jane Marple, knitting needle stilled, steps off the Ostend ferry. Within 7 sapphire blue nights, she unmasks greed, betrayal, and a killer who believes secrets can sink with the tide. But in Bruges, the Bruges remember. Chapter 1, The Invitation. Miss Jane Marple adjusted the lace curtain at the window of Danemead House, allowing a shaft of pale October sunlight to fall upon the letter that had arrived with the morning post. The envelope was of heavy cream paper, addressed in a hand that sloped elegantly to the right, and bore a Belgian stamp depicting a rather stern king. She slit it open with the silver paper knife that had once belonged to her nephew Raymond, and drew out 3 closely written sheets. "My dear Jane," the letter began, in the flowing script of Mrs. Amelia van der Weyden. "It seems an age since we last met at that dreadful bazaar in Much Benham, when the vicar's wife insisted on selling those indigestible rock cakes. I find myself in Bruges. Yes, the Bruges of the swans and the lace-makers. And I am moved to write because I have a little puzzle, which I fancy might amuse you. Nothing alarming, I hasten to add, but quite out of the common way. Do come if you can spare a fortnight. The air is crisp, the canals mirror the sky like sheets of sapphire, and my house on the Diva has a spare room that looks towards the belfry. I enclose a timetable. Your affectionate old friend, Amelia." Miss Marple folded the letter and placed it beside her teacup. Amelia van der Weyden had been Amelia Pritchard before her marriage to a Belgian diplomat. They had shared a dormitory at the finishing school in Florence 50 years ago. Amelia had always possessed a dramatic turn of mind, but her instincts were sound. A little puzzle in Amelia's vocabulary seldom remained little for long. She rose, smoothing the skirt of her dove-grey wool dress, and crossed to the mantelpiece, where a small ormolu clock ticked with gentle precision. The train to London left Danemead at 11:30. The boat train from Victoria connected with the Ostend ferry, and from Ostend a local service ran along the coast to Bruges. It was perfectly feasible. Miss Marple permitted herself a small, decisive nod. She would go. The journey unfolded with the smoothness of long practice. The guard on the Southern Railway knew her by sight and found her a corner seat facing the engine. At Dover the sea lay flat and glittering, the gulls wheeling like scraps of paper. On the ferry she drank a cup of surprisingly good coffee and watched the white cliffs recede. By late afternoon the train from Ostend deposited her on the platform at Bruges, where the air smelled of water and warm brick. A fiacre waited, its horse switching a languid tail. The driver touched his cap. "Mevrouw van der Weyden." "Ja, mevrouw." The carriage bowled along cobbled streets, past houses with stepped gables and windows that reflected the low sun like polished metal. They crossed a bridge, stone arches, iron lanterns, water sliding beneath, and another, until the horse halted before a tall, narrow house with a carved door and brass knocker shaped like a swan. Amelia herself opened the door, smaller than Miss Marple remembered, but with the same bright bird-like eyes. "Jane, you angel to come so quickly. Mind the step. There, that's it. Jean has your bag. Come in, come in. The hall smelled of beeswax and potpourri. A grandfather clock struck 6 with a mellow note. Amelia led the way into a parlour where a wood fire crackled in a Delft-tiled hearth. Tea waited on a low table, thin porcelain cups, a silver hot water kettle hissing gently, plates of speculoos and almond biscuits. "Now," said Amelia, pouring tea with a steady hand, "I must not keep you in suspense. It concerns Lucien Deschamps. You will meet him tomorrow. He keeps a jeweller's shop in the Vollestraat, quite the best in Bruges. For the past month he has received anonymous letters demanding the return of a sapphire brooch, which he insists is his by inheritance. The letters are worded most unpleasantly. The Bruges will claim their own, that sort of thing. Lucien is in a perfect fever. The police say it is a hoax, but Lucien swears someone follows him after dark. I told him about you, Jane, how you unravelled that business of the missing will at the Hydro, and he is longing to consult you." Miss Marple accepted a biscuit and nibbled it thoughtfully. "Has Mr. Deschamps any notion who might wish him harm?" "Only family, he says. A cousin, Victor, who contests the will. And there is an assistant, a quiet girl called Elise, who has been with him for years. But Lucien trusts her implicitly. The brooch itself is magnificent star sapphire, surrounded by brilliants. He keeps it in the safe, but the letters know of it. That is what alarms him. Outside the light faded. The canal water turned from gold to indigo. Somewhere a bell told the hour." Miss Marple set down her cup. "Anonymous letters," she said softly, "are seldom written without motive. Greed, fear, or revenge. Those are the usual springs. We shall see which moves in this case." Amelia laughed. "I knew you would say that. Jeanne has laid a hot brick in your bed, and there is a bowl of potage for supper. Tomorrow we begin." Miss Marple allowed herself to be led upstairs. The guest room overlooked the canal. Through the window she could see the bridges curving like blue ribbons in the dusk. She unpacked her nightgown, her Bible, and the small leather notebook she always carried. Then she stood for a moment, hands clasped, gazing at the quiet water. Bruges, she reflected, was very beautiful. But beauty, like a sapphire, could conceal a flaw. And flaws, in her experience, had a way of coming to light. Chapter 2. The Jeweller's Tale. The morning broke clear and sharp, with a frost that silvered the cobbles and turned the breath of the milk carts into small white clouds. Miss Marple descended the narrow staircase of Amelia's house at 9:15, her black kid gloves buttoned, her bonnet tied with a neat bow beneath the chin. Jeanne, the maid, had pressed her travelling dress and laid out a fur tippet against the chill. Amelia, already breakfasted, waited in the hall with a small wicker basket. "I thought we might walk," she said. "The Vollestraat is no distance, and the air will do us good. Lucien opens at 10, but he will receive us earlier." They stepped out into the crisp light. The canal lay like a sheet of polished steel, reflecting the gables and the slender tower of the Church of Our Lady. Swans glided with majestic indifference, their wings brushing the water into ripples that caught the sun in fleeting diamonds. Miss Marple's stick tapped rhythmically on the stones. Amelia, shorter by a head, kept pace with brisk determination. "Tell me more of this Lucien Deschamps," Miss Marple said as they crossed the first bridge. "Family? Means? Reputation?" Amelia considered. "Old Bruges stock on his mother's side. Lace merchants, once prosperous. The father was French, a watchmaker who came here after the War of '70. Lucien inherited the shop from an uncle. He is perhaps 50, unmarried, lives above the premises with a housekeeper. Not rich, but comfortable. The sapphire brooch is the plum of his collection. He speaks of it as a son might speak of a brilliant child. They turned into a narrower street where the houses leaned confidentially together. Lace curtains fluttered at upper windows. A woman in a blue apron shook a duster. A boy wheeled a barrow of cabbages. The shop of Deschamps et Fils stood midway, its bow window framed in dark green paint, the name picked out in gilt. A single gas lamp still burned above the door, though the morning was bright. Amelia lifted the swan-headed knocker. After a moment, the door opened a cautious inch, revealing a thin, anxious face surmounted by a moustache that seemed to quiver independently of its owner. "Madame van der Weyden, and this is the English lady?" The door swung wider. "Entrez, entrez, I beg." Lucien Deschamps was smaller than Miss Marple had expected, scarcely taller than herself, with narrow shoulders and hands that fluttered like trapped birds. His morning coat was of excellent cut but worn shiny at the cuffs. A tape measure dangled from his waistcoat pocket. He ushered them through the shop, counters of walnut, trays of rings and pendants catching the light, into a small office at the rear. Here the air smelled of cedar and metal polish. A safe, squat and black, stood in one corner. Above it hung a faded photograph of a woman in the elaborate coiffure of the 90s. "Ma grand-tante Clotilde," Lucien explained, following Miss Marple's glance. "It is her brooch that causes all this trouble." He locked the shop door, turned the card to Gesloten, and drew down a green blind. Then, with the air of a priest unveiling a relic, he opened the safe. From a nest of cotton wool, he lifted a leather case, snapped it open, and set the brooch upon the desk. It was magnificent. The sapphire, cabochon cut, lay like a drop of midnight in a circle of small diamonds. The gold setting was delicate, almost lace-like, the pin fashioned as a tiny arrow. "Superb," murmured Amelia. Miss Marple took a small magnifying glass from her reticule and bent over the jewel. The stone was flawless, its star a perfect six-rayed asterism that shifted as she moved the glass. She turned the brooch over. On the reverse, almost invisible, was a hallmark and a date, 1916. "Made during the war," she observed. Lucien nodded. "Clotilde commissioned it in secret. She was unconventional. There were stories." He hesitated, then drew a shallow drawer from the desk. From it, he took a bundle of letters tied with pink tape. "These began a month ago." There were 7 in all, written on common bluish paper in a hand that slanted sharply backward. Miss Marple read them in order, laying each flat as she finished. The first, "The sapphire is not yours. Return it or suffer." The second, 3 days later. "Bruges remembers." The Bridges see all. The third introduced the personal note, "Lucien Deschamps, thief in velvet gloves." By the 5th, the tone had darkened. 1 week. Then the water claims its own. The last received yesterday was brief. "Tonight beneath the Sapphire Bridge. Come alone, or the girl pays." Miss Marple looked up. "The girl? My assistant, Elise Moreau. She's been with me 5 years. Honest, quiet, a little mouse of a creature." I showed her the letters. She turned white, but said nothing. "And this Sapphire Bridge?" Miss Marple asked. Lucien spread his hands. "Bruges has many bridges. The people call them sapphire when the sun strikes the water just so. But there is one, the Bonifacius Brug, where the canal bends sharply and the stone is blue-grey. It's near the Groningen Museum." Miss Marple tapped the letters together. "The paper is cheap, sold in any stationer's. The ink is ordinary violet. The writer is educated. The phrasing is not that of a peasant, but hurried. Observe the blot on the fourth letter. The pen was pressed too hard. Anger, perhaps." She returned the brooch to its case. "Mr. Deschamps, have you enemies?" "None that I know." His moustache drooped. "There is my cousin Victor in Antwerp. He believes the brooch should have come to him. Clotilda's will was witnessed by a notary who died last year, and Victor says the signature was forged. But Victor is a businessman. He would sue, not write letters. Anyone else who might covet the stone?" Lucien hesitated. "Collectors. There is Professor Dubois. He lectures on medieval gold work, and has offered to buy it for the museum. And Mrs. Beaumont, the English widow. She admires it whenever she visits, but they are respectable." Miss Marple closed her notebook. "Respectability, Mr. Deschamps, is a cloak that fits many shoulders. Now this Elise, may we speak with her?" Lucien led them back into the shop. A bell tinkled as he opened a door behind the counter. A narrow staircase rose into shadow. "Elise," he called, "descend still to plate." After a moment, a slight figure appeared. Elise Moreau was perhaps 25, pale, with dark hair drawn severely back and eyes the colour of rain-washed slate. Her hands, when she clasped them, were stained faintly with jeweller's rouge. "Elise, this is Miss Marple, come from England to help us." The girl curtsied, a gesture so old-fashioned that Miss Marple's heart warmed. "Madame," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "Elise, the letters mention you. Are you frightened?" A flicker crossed the pale face. I do not know, madame. Monsieur Lucien is kind. I wish no harm." Miss Marple studied her. The girl's apron was freshly laundered, but there was a small tear at the hem, mended with stitches so tiny they were almost invisible. A careful soul, and the eyes guarded as though weighing each word before it left the lips. "Tell me, Elise, did you ever see Great-Aunt Clotilda?" "Once, when I was a child. She came to the shop in a carriage. She wore the brooch at her throat. She gave me a sugar almond." A ghost of a smile. "I remember the star in the stone." Lucien locked the case and returned it to the safe. "I have told Elise she may leave early today. The letters have unsettled her." Miss Marple inclined her head. "A wise precaution. Mr. Deschamps, will you walk with us to the Bonifacius Brook? I should like to see this Sapphire bridge in daylight." They left the shop together, Lucien turning the key with a click that echoed down the empty street. The sun had climbed higher. The frost was melting into glittering drops. As they walked, Miss Marple noted the jeweller's nervous glance over his shoulder, the way his hand strayed to the breast pocket where he kept his watch. Old habits of caution. The Bonifacius Brook arched over a narrow arm of the canal, its stones mossy, its parapet low. Beneath, the water moved sluggishly, reflecting the sky in shifting fragments of blue. A single swan floated there, neck curved like a question mark. Lucien gripped the stonework. "I stood here last night," he said. "I thought someone watched from the shadows opposite. Then footsteps running and silence." Miss Marple leaned upon her umbrella. "The bridge is secluded after dark. A clever choice for a meeting or an ambush." She looked down. The tide had left a tide line of debris. A broken bottle, a sodden glove, a twist of blue ribbon. Nothing remarkable. Yet something caught her eye. A scrap of paper wedged between two stones, half submerged. She pointed with her umbrella. "Mr. Deschamps, would you retrieve that?" Lucienne bent, fished it out with cautious fingers. It was a torn corner of the same bluish notepaper, the ink blurred but legible. "Or the water will." He stared at it, the colour draining from his face. "Another!" Miss Marple took it gently. "The writer was here then, and in haste, the paper torn, not cut. We progress." Behind them, unseen, a curtain twitched in an upper window across the canal. Miss Marple's sharp eyes noted the movement, but she said nothing. The bridges of Bruges, she reflected, were admirable for observation. One could watch without being watched, or so the watcher believed. They parted at the corner of the Vollestraat, Lucian promising to dine with Amelia that evening. As Miss Marple and her friend retraced their steps, the church bells began to chime the hour, their notes floating across the water like silver coins. "Poor Lucian," Amelia said. "He is terrified." "Fear," replied Miss Marple thoughtfully, "is a great revealer of character. And character, my dear Amelia, is the key to every lock." Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. The evening of the dinner party arrived with a soft, persistent rain that turned the canals into sheets of hammered pewter and set the gas lamps hissing in their globes. Amelia van der Weyden's drawing-room glowed like a jewel box. Beeswax candles in silver sconces, a fire of applewood crackling in the grate, and the long table laid with damask, Meissen porcelain, and crystal that chimed when touched. Miss Marple, in dove-grey silk with a brooch of Whitby jet, sat between Amelia and an empty chair intended for Lucien Deschamps, who had telephoned to say he would be a little late. The company was small but select. Victor Deschamps, the cousin from Antwerp, had arrived that afternoon on the afternoon train and stood now by the mantelpiece. A tall man with a florid complexion and a diamond pin that flashed whenever he moved. He had the air of a commercial traveller who has done rather well and wishes the world to know it. Professor Henri Dubois, lean and saturnine, with a scholar's stoop and eyes that missed nothing, nursed a glass of sherry and discoursed upon the medieval goldsmiths of Bruges. Mrs. Clara Beaumont, the English widow, wore mauve taffeta and a quantity of seed pearls. Her laugh was frequent and metallic. Elise Moreau had been invited out of politeness, but a note delivered by hand that afternoon regretted that she was indisposed. "Poor child," said Lucien when he finally arrived, shaking rain from his coat in the hall. "She has one of her headaches. I sent her home with a powder." He looked drawn, the skin beneath his eyes bruised with fatigue. Amelia pressed a glass of hot punch into his hand and led him to the table. The meal began with consommé madrilène, clear as amber, followed by sole in a delicate white wine sauce. Conversation flowed in 3 languages, but Miss Marple, quietly observant, noted the undercurrents. Victor spoke loudly of the injustice of Clotilde's will, his gaze flicking to the jeweller whenever the brooch was mentioned. Lucien answered in monosyllables, his fingers shredding a bread roll into crumbs. Professor Dubois, between mouthfuls of pheasant, described a newly discovered reliquary in the Groothuis Museum. His voice lingered on the word sapphire, as though tasting it. Mrs. Beaumont complained of the damp, and inquired whether Belgian sapphires were superior to Burmese. Miss Marple, eating sparingly, listened. She had placed her notebook in her lap beneath the damask napkin, and now and then made a tiny mark with a silver pencil. When the soufflé au chocolat arrived fluffy and fragrant, Amelia gave the signal to rise. In the drawing room, coffee was served in eggshell cups. Victor cornered Lucien by the window. "See here, cousin," he said, loudly enough for all to hear. "This nonsense has gone far enough. Sell the brooch and be done with it. I'll give you a fair price, more than fair." Lucien's moustache quivered. "It is not for sale. It is a family trust." "Family trust," Victor snorted. "Clotilde was in her dotage. The notary—" "Gentlemen," Amelia interposed smoothly, "let us speak of pleasanter things. Professor, tell us about the lace exhibition." But the professor was staring at the French windows that opened onto the small balcony overlooking the canal. Rain still fell, streaking the panes, yet something moved in the darkness beyond. A shape, tall, indistinct, hovered for a moment, then vanished. "Did you see?" whispered Mrs. Beaumont, clutching her pearls. "Nerves," said Victor brusquely. "This town is full of shadows." Lucien had gone white. He set down his cup with a clatter. I must go. Elise may need me." Miss Marple rose. "Allow me to accompany you, Mr. Deschamps. The streets are slippery, and two are safer than one." Amelia protested, but Miss Marple was already fetching her cloak. They stepped out into the rain, Lucien holding an umbrella that did little to keep them dry. The cobbles glistened, their footsteps echoed. Halfway along the diver, Lucien stopped beneath a lamp. "I saw him," he said in a strangled voice, "on the balcony, the same height, the same coat. He is following me." Miss Marple looked back. The street was empty save for the rain hissing into the canal. Yet she felt the prickle of watchful eyes. "Come," she said calmly, "we will take the shorter way, past the Minnewater." They crossed the bridge by the Lake of Love, where the swans slept with heads beneath wings. The park was deserted, the trees dripping. Suddenly Lucien stumbled, clutching his arm. "Someone pushed me," he gasped, "from behind, there, under the bridge." Miss Marple peered into the darkness. Water lapped against stone, a rat scuttled, nothing more. But on the path lay a small object, gleaming wetly. She picked it up, a mother-of-pearl button torn from a cuff. "Yours?" she asked. Lucien shook his head. "Never! Mine a bone." They hurried on. At the shop, Lucien fumbled with the key, his hands trembling. Inside, the familiar scent of cedar and metal calmed him a little. He lit the gas, turned the key in the safe, and opened the leather case. The brooch was gone. For a moment, he stood frozen. Then he sank into a chair, covering his face. "Ruined," he whispered. "Clotilde's trust, my reputation." Miss Marple closed the safe door gently. "The thief knew the combination?" "Only Elise and I, and the maker, long dead." She examined the lock. No scratches, no sign of force. "Then either the safe was left open, or someone watched you closely. Tell me, Mr. Deschamps, when did you last see the brooch?" "This morning." Elise polished the case before she left. Miss Marple's lips tightened. "We must visit Elise at once." They took a fiacre to the Rue des Aiguilles, a narrow street of tall houses where artisans lodged. Elise occupied 2 rooms on the second floor. The landlady, a stout woman with a moustache more impressive than Lucien's, met them at the door. "Mademoiselle Moreau. She came in at 6, white as a sheet, took a powder, and went to bed. I heard nothing since." Miss Marple knocked softly. No answer. The landlady produced a key. The sitting room was tidy, a single lamp burning low. On the table, lay an empty medicine bottle and a glass. The bedroom door stood ajar. Elise lay fully dressed upon the bed, one arm trailing to the floor. Her face was tranquil, the lips faintly blue. On the pillow beside her was a scrap of bluish paper. Miss Marple picked it up, the same spidery hand. The Bridges have claimed their own. Lucien gave a choked cry and sank to his knees. Miss Marple felt for a pulse. Found none. She closed the girl's eyes with gentle fingers. "Send for Inspector de Vries," she told the landlady, "and touch nothing." While they waited, she moved quietly about the room. In the grate, ashes of burnt paper. On the dressing table, a small pile of lace handkerchiefs, one embroidered with the initial E. Beneath the pillow, a tiny notebook. She slipped it into her reticule unobserved. The inspector arrived within the quarter hour, a solid man with a brown beard and a deliberate manner. He listened to Lucien's stammered account, examined the body, the bottle, laudanum, and the note. "Suicide," he pronounced. "The girl was depressed. The jeweller confirms it. These anonymous letters preyed upon her mind." Miss Marple said nothing, but her eyes were very bright. When the inspector had gone, taking Lucien for further questioning, she returned to Amelia's house through the silent streets. The rain had ceased. A thin mist rose from the canals. Amelia met her in the hall, rapid and anxious. "Jane, what has happened?" Miss Marple removed her wet cloak. "A great deal, my dear, and very little that is what it seems. Tomorrow we will look more closely at bridges and at buttons." She went upstairs, lit her candle, and opened Elise's notebook. The entries were brief, in a neat convent hand. The last, dated that afternoon, read, "He knows about the map. I must tell Elle before it is too late. God forgive me." Miss Marple closed the book. Somewhere in the quiet house, a clock struck 2. Outside, the mist thickened, swallowing the bridges, the swans, the watching windows. But Miss Marple, undeterred, began to lay her threads in order. Chapter 4. The Body in the Canal. The discovery came at first light, when the mist still clung to the water like a mourner's veil. A bargeman poling his laden craft towards the markt had seen something pale caught among the reeds beneath the Peerdenbrug. He hooked it with his boat hook, expecting a sack of rubbish, and found instead the body of Elise Moreau. By the time Miss Marple reached the bridge, a small knot of people had gathered. The bargeman, 2 gendarmes, a priest murmuring Latin, and Inspector de Vries, coat-collar turned up against the dawn chill. Lucien Deschamps stood a little apart, hat in hand, his face the colour of tallow. The body lay on the bank where they had drawn it. Elise wore the same dark dress she had died in. Died, Miss Marple noted, for the second time. Water had darkened the wool. One shoe was missing. The bruise on the left temple stood out livid against the pallor of the skin, and a thin line of blood had dried at the corner of the mouth. De Vries knelt, lifted the sodden hem. "Drowned," he said, "lungs full of canal water." The current carried her from the Rue des Aiguilles, 1/2 a mile, no more. Miss Marple bent closer. The sleeve of the dress was torn at the elbow. A thread of dark wool clung to a nail in the wooden piling. She straightened. "Inspector, may I see the shoe that remains?" He produced it from a canvas bag. A neat black kid, the sole scarcely worn. Miss Marple turned it over. The heel was caked with fresh mud, greyish, with a fleck of something white. Plaster, perhaps. "Curious," she murmured. "The streets were wet last night, but not muddy. And plaster suggests a building, not a canal bank." De Vries shrugged. She walked in her distress. People do strange things. Lucien found his voice. She was in her room at 10 o'clock. I left her with the laudanum myself. How could she come here? The inspector's tone was patient. She woke, took more of the drug, wandered out in delirium. The bridge has no rail on the inner side. A step too far. Miss Marple's glance travelled to the water. The tide was ebbing. A swirl of debris moved sluggishly, past orange peel, a broken crate, a single white glove. She looked up at the bridge. The stone parapet was low. It was true, but a sober person would have to lean far to fall. And Elise had not been sober. "Inspector," she said quietly, "will you have the body taken to the mortuary? I should like to know the exact quantity of laudanum in the blood, and whether the bruise was made before or after death." De Vries gave her a long look, then nodded to his men. The canvas was drawn over the still face. The small procession moved off towards the hospital. Miss Marple remained on the bridge. She walked its length slowly, umbrella tip tapping. Halfway across, she paused, stooped, and picked up a scrap of bluish paper, pinned by the wind against the stone. It was sodden but legible, beneath the sapphire. The rest was washed away. She tucked it into her glove. Amelia met her at the house with hot coffee and anxiety. "Jane, it is dreadful. First the brooch, now poor Elise. What does it mean?" "It means," said Miss Marple, removing her bonnet, "that someone is very much afraid of what Elise knew. Come, we will visit the Rue des Aiguilles again. There are questions the landlady can answer." The landlady, Madame Lefebvre, was sweeping her doorstep with vigour, her moustache bristling with importance. "Yes, madame. I locked the street door at 11, as always. No one could leave without my key." "And Mademoiselle Moreau? Did she have visitors?" "None. Only Monsieur Deschamps, who brought the powder. He left at 10. Miss Marple climbed the stairs. The sitting room was unchanged. The empty bottle, the glass with its faint brown residue, the ashes in the grate. She opened the window. The sill was damp, but a faint footprint showed in the dust. A man's shoe, narrow, with a rubber heel. She closed the window and turned to the bedroom. The bed had been stripped by the police, but the mattress remained. Miss Marple pressed it with careful fingers. Beneath the pillow area, it was damp, as though something wet had lain there. She lifted the corner. A faint stain, brownish, spread across the ticking. Laudanum, perhaps, or canal water. Downstairs again, she thanked Madame Lefebvre and stepped into the street. Amelia followed, puzzled. "Jane, you look as though you have found a sixpence and lost a sovereign." "On the contrary," said Miss Marple, "I have found several sixpences. The picture is taking shape." They lunched frugally at a small estaminet near the Beginhof. Clear soup, an omelette, a glass of pale ale. Miss Marple ate in silence, her mind arranging facts like pieces on a chessboard. When the coffee came, she spoke. Elise did not leave her room after 10 o'clock. Someone came to her. That someone gave her more laudanum. Enough to stupefy but not to kill. Then he carried her to the canal, struck her head to simulate a fall, and pushed her in. The torn sleeve caught on the piling, the shoe gathered, mud from a building site near the bridge. The note was placed on the pillow to suggest suicide. Amelia's cup rattled in its saucer. But who? That we must discover. The brooch is the key. Elise's notebook mentions a map. Sapphires can be engraved microscopically. Codes, plans. Clotilde lived through the occupation. She had a lover in the resistance. Suppose the brooch concealed information valuable today. Names, perhaps, or a cache of art treasures. Someone wants it desperately. They walked back through the town. At the Vollestraat, the shop was shuttered, a black bow tied to the door. Lucien had gone to his sister in Ghent. Miss Marple stood a moment, looking at the empty window. "Professor Dubois lectures this afternoon at the Groothuis," she said, "on medieval enamels. I think we should attend." The lecture room was half full. Students, a few tourists, Mrs. Beaumont in a large hat. Dubois stood on the dais, pointer in hand, a slide projector throwing coloured images onto a screen. He spoke of cloisonné and champlevé, of sapphires used as covers for reliquaries. His voice was dry, precise. During questions, Miss Marple rose. "Professor, you mentioned star sapphires. Can such a stone be engraved without destroying the star?" Dubois hesitated a fraction too long. "It is possible, with a diamond point, but the star would be marred." "Yet if the engraving were beneath the surface, microscopic?" A ripple of interest. Dubois smiled thinly. "A pretty theory, madame, but impractical. The stone would fracture." Miss Marple sat down. Mrs. Beaumont leaned across. "Clever old thing, aren't you? But Henri knows his gems." After the lecture, Miss Marple lingered. Dubois packed his slides with care. She approached. "Professor, a word. The Deschamps brooch. Have you examined it closely?" He looked up, eyes sharp. "Once, in Lucent's shop. A fine example." "Would you know if it contained an engraving? I should detect any flaw." His tone was final. Miss Marple thanked him and left. Outside, Amelia shivered. "He lied, Jane. I saw it in his face." "Yes," said Miss Marple. "He lied, and someone else is lying too. Tonight we will set a little trap." She wrote 2 notes on Amelia's crested paper. One to Victor Deschamps at his hotel. "The brooch is found. Meet me at the Bonifacius-Brug midnight. Come alone." The other to Professor Dubois, identical. She sealed them, gave them to Jeanne with instructions. At 11 o'clock the house was dark. Miss Marple sat by her window, shawl about her shoulders. The canal lay silent, the bridge's black arches against the starlight. At 11:45, she slipped downstairs, unlatched the door, and stepped into the night. The Bonifacius-Brug was empty. She took her station in the shadow of the parapet, a small dark figure against the stone. The minutes ticked by, then footsteps, quick, impatient. Victor Deschamps appeared, coat collar high, bulky parcel beneath his arm. He looked about. "Well, where is it?" A second set of footsteps, lighter. Dubois emerged from the opposite side, a torch in his hand. "You," Victor snarled. "I might have known." Dubois smiled. "The brooch, Victor. You have it. I have a decoy. The real one is safe." Victor's hand went to his pocket. Miss Marple stepped forward. "Gentlemen, you are both too late. The brooch is with Inspector de Vries, and so, very shortly, will you be." Headlights flared. 2 gendarmes appeared as if from the stones themselves. Victor swore, dropped the parcel, a wrapped brick, and bolted. Dubois stood still, the torch falling from his fingers. Miss Marple picked it up. "You see, Professor, bridges are admirable for meetings, but they are also admirable for watching who comes and who does not." Back at Amelia's house, over cocoa, she explained. Elise discovered the engraving, perhaps when cleaning the stone. She confided in someone, intending to tell Lucia, that someone silenced her and took the brooch. The notes were a blind to suggest an outsider. But the paper came from Dubois' study. I saw the same pad on his desk this afternoon. Victor wanted the brooch for its value. Dubois for what it concealed. Between them, they created confusion enough to cover murder. And the body in the canal? Staged. The laudanum was in the glass, not the bottle. The bruise was made with a stone from the bridge. But they overlooked the mud on the shoe and the footprint on the sill. Amelia poured more cocoa. Will they hang? In Belgium, I believe, the penalty is still severe, but justice will be done. Outside, the swans called once, a lonely sound. Miss Marple set down her cup. "Tomorrow," she said, "I shall walk by the sapphire bridges in sunlight. They are beautiful, Amelia. But even beauty must be examined closely, or it may hide a deadly flaw." Chapter 5. The Sapphire's Secret. The following morning unfolded with a deceptive calm. A pale sun climbed above the gables, striking sparks from the wet cobbles and turning the canals into ribbons of liquid light. Miss Marple breakfasted alone. Amelia had taken to her bed with a nervous headache, and then walked slowly to the police headquarters in the Burg. Inspector de Vries received her in a small office smelling of ink and tobacco. The brooch lay on his blotter, returned by Lucien Deschamps, who had found it hidden in Elise's sewing basket when he went to collect her few belongings. Hidden or planted? Miss Marple asked. De Vries tapped the leather case. "We shall see. The post-mortem confirms your suspicions. Laudanum sufficient to stupefy, but death by drowning. The bruise antedated immersion, and the mud on the shoe matches a patch of builder's clay behind the Groninger Museum, close to the Brugge." He opened the case. The sapphire caught the light, its star winking like a conspirator. Dubois and Victor Deschamps are in cells. Dubois refuses to speak. Victor swears he acted alone. Mrs. Beaumont has taken the Ostend train in a panic. We have telegraphed ahead. Miss Marple lifted the brooch, turning it to the window. "May I borrow a lens, Inspector?" A powerful magnifying glass was produced. She adjusted the blinds until a shaft of sunlight struck the stone. Then, with infinite care, she tilted it. The star shifted, and beneath it, faint as breath on glass, appeared a lattice of lines. "There," she said softly, "a map, micro-engraved on the underside of the cabochon. Clotilda's lover was a cartographer in the Resistance. He hid his work in the one place the Germans would not suspect, a jewel on a woman's bosom." De Vries whistled. "Names, locations. Both, I fancy. See the cross? That will be a church. The dotted line, a tunnel perhaps. The war is 30 years past, but some secrets remain dangerous. Art looted from the cathedral, gold from the Banque Nationale. Men have killed for less." She laid the brooch down. Dubois recognized the possibility when he examined it for the museum. He needed money. His lectures barely paid the rent. Victor wanted the stone for its face value. Between them, they frightened Lucien with letters, hoping he would sell. When Elise discovered the engraving, she became a danger. Dubois silenced her. Victor seized the chance to steal the brooch and cast blame on an outsider. De Vries nodded slowly. "And the note on the pillow?" "Written in advance. Dubois is left-handed, the slant is backward. The paper matches a block in his study." A constable knocked. "Professor Dubois will speak now, sir. Only to the English lady." Miss Marple followed the man along a whitewashed corridor to a bare room with a deal table and 2 chairs. Dubois sat handcuffed, his scholar's stoop more pronounced. His eyes were red-rimmed but steady. "You have won, madame," he said without preamble. "I underestimated village spinsters." Miss Marple took the opposite chair. Tell me from the beginning, Professor. The truth may lighten your sentence." He gave a wintry smile. "Lighten, in Belgium, but very well. In 1944, I was a boy of 16, courier for the Resistance. Clotilde van Loon, yes, the same Clotilde, was our link with Brussels. Her lover, René Maes, engraved the map on the sapphire she wore. When the network was betrayed, René was shot. Clotilde kept the brooch. After the war, she married a Deschamps cousin, but the secret stayed with her. She died believing it buried forever." He leaned forward. "Years later, I recognized the stone in Lucian's window. I offered to buy it for the museum. He refused. Then the letters began. My idea, to panic him into selling. Victor muscled in, greedy fool. When Elise found the engraving while cleaning the setting, she came to me in terror. 'It must go to the authorities,' she said. I could not allow that. The map leads to a cellar beneath the old seminary. Paintings, bullion, enough to buy a new life. So you drugged her, carried her to the canal, and staged the suicide. Yes, Victor stole the brooch that same night. He had watched Lucien open the safe 100 times. I let him take the blame." Miss Marple's voice was gentle. "And Mrs. Beaumont? A foolish woman. She lent me money, hoped for a share. She knew nothing of the murder." He sat back, spent. "You have the map, madame. Use it wisely." Miss Marple rose. "Wisdom, Professor, is knowing when a secret should remain buried. The war is over. The dead need no vengeance." She left him staring at the wall. At noon she met Lucien in a small café near the Belfry. He looked 10 years older, but his hands were steady as he pushed a cup of chocolate towards her. "Elise's funeral is tomorrow," he said. "I shall close the shop for the day." "A proper tribute," Miss Marple replied. "She was loyal, and loyalty is rare." Lucien hesitated. "The brooch, will it be returned to me?" "When the authorities have copied the map, yes. But I counsel you, Mr. Deschamps, sell it openly, divide the proceeds with Victor if he is released, and let the past rest." He nodded, eyes filling. "You are kind, madame." Kindness is merely justice in a soft address. That afternoon Miss Marple walked alone to the seminary, a crumbling building scheduled for demolition. With the inspector's permission, she descended the cellar steps, lantern in hand. The air was cold, thick with the smell of earth and age. In the far corner, beneath a pile of broken statues, lay a steel box. She did not open it. Instead, she marked the spot with a chalk cross and climbed back into the sunlight. De Vries met her at the top. "Well, let the Belgian government decide," she said. "Some treasures belong to history, not to private hands." Evening found her packing at Amelia's house. The little leather notebook lay open on the dressing table. She added a final entry in her neat script. Case resolved. Motive, greed masked as scholarship. Method, poison and water. Moral, secrets like sapphires reflect light, but also cast shadows. Amelia tapped at the door. "The carriage is here, Jane. Must you go so soon?" "Duty calls me home," Miss Marple said, snapping the case shut. "But I shall carry Bruges with me. The swans, the bridges, the quiet courage of a girl who tried to do right." They embraced. The fiacre bowled through the twilight streets, past the sapphire bridges now glimmering with the first lamps. Miss Marple looked back once. The city seemed to breathe, ancient and serene, its secrets safe again. At Ostend, she boarded the night ferry. The sea was calm, the stars bright. She stood at the rail, the wind cool on her cheek, and thought of Elise walking those same bridges in fear. Then she thought of justice, quiet and inexorable, and permitted herself a small, satisfied smile. The Sapphire's secret was unveiled, the Bruges had spoken, and Miss Marple, ever watchful, sailed home to Danemead with another tale to ponder in the stillness of her garden. Chapter 6. The Trap. The trap was set with the precision of a watchmaker's tweezers. Miss Marple had persuaded Inspector de Vries to withhold the full truth of the Sapphire's secret for one more day. The map remained uncopied, the cellar beneath the seminary untouched. Instead, a rumour was allowed to drift through the cafes and hotels of Bruges. The brooch had been recovered, the engraving photographed, and the treasure located. Those who had schemed for it would come, like moths to a candle, and the candle would burn them. Victor Deschamps was released on bail that afternoon, his bluster subdued by a night in the cells. He took a room at the Hôtel de Palme Noire, near the Markt, and sent a note to Lucien begging an interview. Lucien, under Miss Marple's instruction, replied that he would meet his cousin at the Bonifaciusbrug at 11 that night, bringing the brooch. A second note, identical, went to Professor Dubois, who had been granted the same conditional freedom. Mrs. Beaumont, detained at Ostend, was permitted to return under escort. She arrived at dusk, pale and tight-lipped, and took tea at Amelia's house, protesting her innocence with every sip. Miss Marple spent the afternoon in quiet preparation. She visited the jeweller's shop, now reopened under a mournful black ribbon, and borrowed from Lucien a paste replica of the brooch. Excellent work, the sapphire a flawless piece of glass. She pinned it to the bosom of her travelling cloak, then walked the bridges of Bruges until she knew every shadow, every echo. At 10 o'clock she dined lightly, sole, a glass of Vouvray, and retired early, or so Amelia believed. At 10:30 she slipped downstairs, unlatched the garden door that opened onto the canal, and stepped into the night. The city was hushed. A thin mist rose from the water, curling about the lanterns like cigarette smoke. The swans slept in a white huddle beneath the Minnewater Bridge. Miss Marple's stick made no sound on the damp stones. Her cloak, dark as the night itself, rendered her near invisible. She reached the Bonifaciusbrug at 11:15 and took her station in the deep recess, where the arch met the parapet. From here she could see both approaches, and the black water sliding beneath. The church clock struck the 3/4. Footsteps, quick, uneven, sounded on the left. Victor Deschamps appeared, coat collar high, a bulky envelope in his gloved hand. He looked about, swore under his breath, and leaned on the parapet. Minutes passed. A second set of footsteps, lighter, more deliberate. Professor Dubois emerged from the right, a slender silhouette against the mist. He carried no light. "Victor," he said softly, "you are punctual. The brooch." Victor straightened. "First the money. Half now, half when the cellar is opened." Dubois laughed, a dry sound. "You still believe in honour among thieves? Lucien will not come. I sent him a counter-note, warning him to stay away." Victor's hand went to his pocket. "Then you have the stone?" "I have something better." Dubois stepped closer. "The map is memorized, the brooch is paste, but you, my friend, are expendable." A blade flashed. Victor gave a choked cry and staggered back. The envelope fell, papers scattered like white moths. Miss Marple stepped from the shadow. "Enough, Professor!" Dubois whirled. For a moment the mist seemed to part, revealing Inspector de Vries and 4 gendarmes on the far side. Silent until now. Dubois lunged, not at Miss Marple, but at the parapet. He vaulted it with surprising agility and dropped into the canal. There was a splash, a swirl of black water, then nothing. De Vries ran to the edge, lantern raised. "He'll surface." "No," said Miss Marple calmly. "The current is strong here. It bends towards the sluice gates. By the time they open, he will be far downstream." Victor was on his knees, clutching his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers. "He meant to kill me," he gasped. "The envelope, banknotes, counterfeit. I was to pay him for the map." Miss Marple knelt, tore a strip from her petticoat, and bound the wound with practised efficiency. "You will live, Mr. Deschamps, and you will talk. The courts are merciful to those who assist justice." Mrs. Beaumont arrived minutes later, escorted by a constable. She took one look at the scene. The scattered papers, the blood on the stones, the empty parapet, and fainted with perfect timing into the arms of the nearest gendarme. Back at police headquarters, under the glare of electric light, the threads were gathered. Victor, pale but coherent, confessed to the theft of the brooch and the planting of the suicide note. He had watched Lucien open the safe 100 times. Elise, drugged, had been no obstacle. He denied murder. Dubois' body was recovered at dawn, tangled in the reeds below the sluice. In his pocket was a waterproof packet containing a hand-drawn copy of the map, accurate to the last detail. His confession, scribbled on the back of an envelope, was brief. The girl knew too much. Victor was a tool. The treasure was mine by right of blood. My uncle was René Mice. Mrs. Beaumont, revived with sal volatile, admitted lending Dubois money and receiving letters that hinted at a great discovery. She swore she had never suspected murder. Miss Marple listened to the depositions without comment. When all was done, she asked for the paste brooch. De Vries handed it over. "A pretty thing," he said. "Almost perfect." "Almost," Miss Marple agreed. "But the star is fixed. A real star sapphire moves with the light. That is how Elise knew, and how Dubois knew she knew." She pinned the replica to her cloak. "The original will go to the Casse Museum, the map to the archives. The treasure, if it exists, belongs to Belgium, and Elise's name will be cleared. That is the least we can do." At noon she walked once more to the Pierdenbroek. The sun was high, the water sparkled. A small wreath of white lilies floated where the body had been found. Miss Marple stood a moment, head bowed. "Poor child," she murmured. "You tried to do right, and it cost you everything. But the Bruges remember." She turned away. The city was beautiful again, its secrets laid bare, its shadows banished by the clear light of truth. Miss Marple's work was done. Chapter 7. The Bruges verdict. The inquest was held 3 days later in the ancient chamber of the Bruxevrij, beneath a ceiling painted with the arms of long-forgotten burgomasters. Sunlight slanted through high windows, gilding the dust motes that drifted above the polished table. Inspector de Vries read his report in a level voice. Lucien Deschamps gave evidence with downcast eyes. Victor, bandaged and sullen, confirmed the theft but denied complicity in murder. Mrs. Beaumont, veiled in black, wept decorously into a lace handkerchief. The coroner, a thin man with a voice like dry leaves, brought in verdicts of wilful murder against Henri Dubois, deceased, and of theft and conspiracy against Victor Deschamps. The sapphire brooch was formally handed to the Groothuis Museum. the map to the state archives, and the steel box from the seminary cellar, found to contain 3 small canvases and a quantity of gold louis, was sealed for the nation. Miss Marple sat in the public gallery, gloved hands folded over her umbrella, and watched justice administered with the quiet efficiency of a well-run household. When the proceedings ended, she slipped away before the journalists could corner her. Amelia met her at the house on the Duver, with tea and hot buttered toast. The fire crackled. Outside, the swans sailed past like white galleons. "It is finished, Jane," Amelia said. "You have given Bruges back its peace." Miss Marple poured milk with a steady hand. "Peace is never given, Amelia. It is only borrowed. But the bridges are quiet again." That evening Lucien called, carrying a small parcel wrapped in tissue. He laid it on the table with reverence. "For you, madame, from the shop, a token." Miss Marple unwrapped it. A tiny silver swan, its eye a seed pearl. She turned it in her fingers. "Exquisite, but I have done nothing to deserve gifts." "You have done everything," he said simply. "Elise's name is cleared. The brooch will be remembered for its beauty, not its curse. And I shall sell the business and go to my sister in Ghent, a quieter life." He left with a bow. Amelia watched him go. Poor man, he will never be the same. "No one ever is," Miss Marple replied, "after they have looked into the abyss." The next morning she walked the city one last time. The frost had returned, rhyming the bridges with silver. At the Bonifaciusbrug, she paused leaning on the parapet. The water below was dark and swift. A single leaf spun in the current like a tiny boat. She thought of Elise, of Dubois, of the greed that had turned a jewel into a weapon. Then she opened her hand and let the silver swan slip into the canal. It flashed once and was gone. "Rest," she whispered to the water. At noon the fiacre arrived. Amelia embraced her on the doorstep, eyes bright. "You will come again, Jane, when the swans call," Miss Marple promised. The journey home was uneventful. At Ostend, the sea lay flat and grey. Gulls followed the ferry with hopeful cries. On the train to London she dozed, waking only when the guard announced Victoria. Jane Mead House greeted her with the scent of wood smoke and the faint ticking of the ormolu clock. She hung her cloak, placed her umbrella in the stand, and sat down to a solitary tea. The village seemed smaller after Bruges, the garden hemmed in by laurel hedges instead of canals. Yet when she looked out at the familiar view, the church spire to the post office, the neat rows of cottages, she felt the quiet satisfaction of a traveller returned to harbour. That evening she wrote a brief note on a sheet of Basildon bond. "My dear Raymond, thank you for the paper knife. It served me well in Belgium. The little matter of the sapphire brooch is settled. Human nature, as you know, is much the same in Flemish as in English. Your affectionate aunt, Jane." She sealed it, addressed it, and laid it on the hall table for the morning post. Then she took up her knitting, the needles clicking softly in the firelight. Outside, the autumn wind stirred the leaves, and somewhere a church bell tolled the hour. Miss Marple knitted on, serene and unhurried, for the bridges of Bruges had delivered their verdict, and the world, her small corner of it at least, was in order once more.